morning, you're watching Businessworld Live. I'm Danny Laurel.
And I'm Jess De Los Santos. Here are the biggest stories to kickstart this trading day, Wednesday. NEDA is confident that the country will hit its growth target for this year despite the expected impact of the Russia-Ukraine war on domestic prices.
The Finance Department is firm on rejecting calls to suspend excise taxes on fuel products.
Metro Manila will remain under Alert Level 1 until the end of the month. 47 other areas are also placed under the least restrictive status for the rest of March.
And a recent survey shows that climate change has replaced COVID-19 as the top concern for Filipinos. We begin our broadcast with NEDA expressing optimism that the country will hit its growth target this year.
That's despite the impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine on commodity prices. NEDA Chief Carl Chua says the domestic economy was 100 billion pesos short from reaching its pre-pandemic output in 2021. And he hopes that by the first quarter of this year, the economy will exceed its 2019 level. Chua says the shift to Alert Level 1 has added over 9 billion to the economy per week. He also expects the return of face-to-face schooling to add at least 12 billion pesos a week to the economy. Chua acknowledges concerns about the ongoing conflict in Eastern Europe, but he says the Philippines has a very strong economy to face global headwinds.
Now, the Finance Department warns that the government will lose more than 138 billion pesos in a year. That's if all fuel taxes are suspended. That's why they are proposing to just focus on distributing targeted subsidies to the affected sectors. The department is referring to the 6,500 peso subsidy for drivers and fisherfolk.
Hindi po talaga natin sinasang-ayunan ang overall suspension ng excise tax. Kasi yung ating economic growth at government spending naka-attach nga kung magkano ang nakokolekta natin in terms of revenue. So sa mga panahon na katulad ngayon, pag in the future ginawa mong automatic yung suspension, wala ka nang mabibigay na subsidy sa poor. So basically, ang binibigyan mo ng subsidy, yung mas mayayaman. Kasi sila yung binibigyan mo ng relief sa pagtanggal mo ng excise tax. Kasi again, sinasabi nga natin, pag mas marami kang kinukonsumo, mas malaki ang iyong binabayaran.
Finance Chief Sonny Dominguez is firm on rejecting calls for the suspension of excise taxes on fuel products. During President Duterte's regular Talk to the People aired earlier this morning, Dominguez says not everyone will benefit from the proposal. Even Energy Secretary Alfonso Cusi warns against the suspension of excise taxes on fuel.
This is our firm recommendation, Mr. President. One, to retain the fuel excise tax imposed under train law. And second, we provide targeted subsidies of 200 pesos per month per household for 1 year to the bottom 50% of the Filipino households.
Ito pong clamor ng publiko to suspend the excise tax. Ang mas malaki po ang magiging pinsala sa ating budget kung gagawin po natin ng excise tax. And we support yung pong panukala na magbigay na lang po ng additional ayuda.
Now, as fuel prices reach record highs, motorists are finding ways to save up on gas, with some even refraining from using their personal vehicles for now.
Well, let's find out what experts have to say about this, along with other fuel-saving tips in this report by Marian Enriquez.
With 11 straight weeks of oil price hikes, fuel in this gasoline station in Manila now goes as high as 77 pesos per liter. But this is already considered cheap. It can cost as high as 90 pesos in other cities. That's why some motorists are now desperate for ways to save up on gas. But how exactly do you do that? Jason Tulio, Assistant Managing Editor of Top Gear Philippines, says the first tip is to make sure that your vehicle is well maintained.
If something's wrong with the engine or the tires or the suspension, maaring mapuwersa yung makina at mahirapan siyang tumakbo, and that results in consuming more fuel.
Tulio also pointed out the importance of having the right tire pressure.
Tires are designed to run at optimum efficiency with a certain level of air inside the car. Pag tumatakbo kasi yung kotse, syempre yung nakakontak sa sahig ay yung gulong. So it has to do with the amount of surface area na nakaano sa gulong. Honestly, it's quite complicated.
The expert says that it also helps to carry only light baggages and to refrain from going too fast.
You step confidently but gently. You use as much power as you need without using too much. Another thing is iwasan natin yung tinatawag nilang idling, yung naka-on lang yung sasakyan habang hindi umaandar.
But another way to enjoy being in a car without worrying about could cost as much? Carpooling. Jello is fond of carpooling and says it has lots of benefits.
For example, kahit minimum magkaroon ka ng 3 passengers, that's 300 one way. So pag pauwi ka, most likely meron ka rin kasabay dyan pauwi, depende sa schedule mo. So that's 600 per day. So usually yun na yung pwede mong gawin na panggas mo.
As spike in fuel prices is showing no signs of slowing down, it surely won't hurt to follow these tips to save up on a few pesos. For News 5, Marian Enriquez, we are One News.
The House Committee on Energy has approved a bill seeking to prevent oil companies from raising prices of old stock amid the soaring global fuel prices. The proposal also requires oil players to increase their minimum inventory to prevent fluctuations in local prices. Marikina Representative Stella Kimbo claims unbundling the retail price of local petroleum products is a tool to ensure the effectivity of oil deregulation. However, the Independent Philippine Petroleum Companies Association is opposing these amendments. The group says price unbundling is not the solution to reduce local fuel prices. Pampanga Representative Mikey Arroyo is urging Malacanang to call for a special session and certify the proposed amendments to the oil deregulation law as urgent. Meanwhile, in other news, the IATF has decided to retain the Alert Level 1 status in Metro Manila, noting that the so-called Alert Level 0 status is not yet official. The task force has also decided to add more areas under Alert Level 1. Starting today until the end of the month, NCR will remain under the least restrictive status, along with 23 other provinces and cities in the Cordilleras, Ilocos, Cagayan Valley, Central Luzon, Calabarzon, Mimaropa, and Bicol. Alert Level 1 has also been extended in 10 areas in the Visayas. These include the cities of Bacolod, Iloilo, Cebu, Ormoc, and Tacloban. In Mindanao, areas under Alert Level 1 are Zamboanga City, Cagayan de Oro, Camiguin, Davao City, and Butuan City. The rest of the country will remain under Alert Level 2.
The health department says COVID-19 is becoming less of a threat here in the country. Health Undersecretary Mirna Cabotaje said mask requirements can possibly be a thing of the past soon, but she clarifies that masks could still be required in crowded places and hospitals.
Nasabi na ni Secretary Duque na baka pwede nang alisin yung pagmamask unless yung mga matataong lugar and is high. Kagaya ng mga pagpumunta ka sa mga ospital, sa mga health facilities, kailangan naka-mask.
But Metro Manila mayors do not agree. They say even if the country's restriction is eased to so-called Alert Level 0, it's still better to wear a mask to ensure that no person will be infected as the country reopens.
Kung ano i-recommenda ng ating IATF. Pero ang aming sentimiento ay hanggat maaari, hindi po natin pwedeng i-impose kung hindi po i-impose ng IATF. Gusto lang po namin na patuloy pa rin na mag-suot face mask hanggang masabi na po natin na talagang hindi na po tayo matatamaan ng COVID-19, lalong-lalo na ngayong bukas na po ang ating mga airports.
Meanwhile, a recent survey shows that climate change has replaced COVID-19 as the top concern for Filipinos. With the end of the pandemic seemingly in sight, 46% of respondents of the latest DING Global Prepaid Index said climate change is now their main concern. That's the highest out of all the countries surveyed. The same survey found that Filipinos who have not had access to traditional banks may now avoid them altogether in favor of alternative finance management options. Only 13% of Filipinos surveyed are bank account holders, while 19% use crypto, a high percentage of crypto adoption. Now, to talk more about this, we have Muhannad Hassan, Ding Managing Director for Middle East and Asia. Good morning, Sir Muhannad. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, Jess. Thank you for having me.
All right, again, picking up from that report here, the assumption being that we're hopefully at the tail end of the pandemic, 46% of Filipino respondents say that climate change is now a primary concern. Why is that, and how does that translate to making sustainable choices?
So I think, if you look at the Philippines, they depend on tourism a lot as a country, and for countries like this, it's very important, that climate change is addressed as soon as possible. The traditional ways of doing things should finish, like having traditional banks and going to new banks, which basically focus on less branches, less people, less paper. Everything should be done through technology, and that's about it.
Sir, how much savings in terms of ecological savings, the footprint, happens when we turn digital, when we start becoming a cashless society and we start using such apps? And are you seeing the benefits already here in the Philippines?
So absolutely, if you look at the survey, basically only 30% use traditional banks. Traditional banks basically have some requirements that Filipino people don't have. Maybe they're looking for high salary people. This basically makes limitation, and also they're not available in many of the geographic areas across the Philippines. So the traditional banks basically offer a way for people to connect online with less branches, less travel to branches, less paper, and this will basically have lots of benefits on the environment because of that.
Sir, but in addition to that, we are seeing the increased usage of electricity, the increased usage. If you mentioned earlier on Bitcoin, even mining has been questioned if it's using too much energy and it's not climate change efficient. Is this not an issue for you as we shift to a completely digitalized world? Do those benefits still outweigh the costs on the environment?
Absolutely. If you look at a typical bank, like in any country, they will have tens, if not hundreds, of branches, and this basically requires people to travel, both employees and customers, to these branches. Also, basically, the use of electricity is very, very high. The crypto usage, basically, it's maybe a way for people to maybe fill the vacuum that the banks cannot address. And basically, people want sometimes to make additional income by adopting crypto, which basically appreciates in time, as we see it right now.
Okay, speaking of crypto, adoption here is at 19%, relatively high compared to other markets, like what you mentioned in your report here, while access, again, to traditional banks is only at 30%. You're in your second year of doing this survey. What trend are you seeing here? Are we already seeing a shift here, an acceleration of digital adoption?
Absolutely. In Ding, basically, we work with the international communities or expats, outside their home countries. So one of the highest percentage of technology adoption is the Filipinos. Therefore, we see this trend increasing year on year, for adopting new technologies, ways for us to send the top up internationally, and also using the apps and using basically all other technology, assistance, to make calls or to send money or send basically, or just connect to your family back home.
Okay, sir, pre-pandemic, I recall having some interviews saying that, in the Philippines, we have very high adoption of social media. We have very high penetration of cell phones, smartphones, Facebook usage. But then digital banking was very, very much left behind compared to the rest of ASEAN. And also the investments in cybersecurity was very much behind. Has this changed because of the pandemic, and to what extent?
Yes, we saw a lot of people using our online platform versus basically the non-digital or basically the retail stores. We saw lots of people just going trying to use the banks. It gives them basically an access to maybe credit card. This is the neobanks, access to credit cards that traditional banks won't give them. Because as we mentioned, basically they have special requirements. It could be salary, it could be some documentation, or it could be basically lack of awareness. So people are using like a lot of new technological tools like the neobank, and we see basically the buying online is still very low at 5%, but we expect it to increase over the next few months and years.
Okay, lastly, Mohamed, before we let you go, your report or your survey also shows that the prepaid, at least a prepaid form of payments is in a way already becoming a preferred option among Filipinos here. What trend are you seeing here for the Philippines, and where do you see it heading, at least for this year?
So this trend actually in Philippines, it's much higher than like across the world, but the trend is growing. People are using prepaid products for ease of use, budgeting, and especially for people on fixed income. They find it always the preferred way of spending their money, across all needs like groceries, education, and so forth.
All right, thank you very much again for those insights. Still a long way to go when it comes to digital adoption, especially when it comes to finances, but then we have to make those progress. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Mohamed Hassan, Ding Managing Director for Middle East and Asia.
Thank you very much.
Coming right up after the break. Local shares rebound after seeing a sharp sell-off.
More of that and other stories when Business World Live returns. Stay with us.
watching Business World Live here on One News. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel.
Dan, it seems like everyday stocks just dramatically swing the other way. Here we go with that bargain hunting rebound at the PSCI yesterday. But the question is, where is it headed today?
Jess, exactly like you said, the other way. Yesterday, we rose by 3%. We closed just above 7,019 on Tuesday. And that was on the back of First Metro Investments. Tina Ulang is explaining that the PSCI is apparently very resilient. Bargain hunting, like you mentioned, accumulating for long-term investing. She says investors are remaining confident that the Philippine economy is of sound footing again, can absorb the downside risks from all these geopolitical tensions. But as you can see in my terminal here, we are just holding on by a thread to 7,000 yet again, Jess. Parang we really cannot catch a break. Once we've actually started going above it, we start going below it again. We are down by 0.3%. And this comes even as the capital is staying, under the loosest curbs. Perhaps people were hoping that would be chucked out altogether, alert level 0 na, but hasn't been the case. Let's take a quick peek at our biggest movers here. I'm going to pull out the one-day chart for you. You can see Converge leading the charge here, but of course, there are half and half here. So markets pulling in either direction. You've got also the likes of JG Summit, which has a lot of retail, of course. Mondanisan, a very big consumer stock. SM Prime, a property player. So really very mixed when it comes to that. And speaking of SM Prime, I did want to take a look at the malls because these are what will be very much affected, of course, by our maintaining that alert level 1 status, so to speak. And apart from SM Prime, which is down by close to 2% today, the others, particularly Mega World, which is also a very big mall player, and Ayala Land are actually jumping this morning. What about the food players? Kakain ba sa labas ang mga tao? Let's see. Now, Maxis seems to be retreating. That's down by 2.3%. JFC as well. And take a look at the pizza or Shakey's. It's down by 5.8%. Pretty hefty. Figaro as well. It's down by more than 5%. So a lot of the food players here quite affected, Jess. And again, don't forget that, I'm just going to pull out this interesting chart on Bloomberg here, that the PSEI has still been in a retreat. So despite the fact that we did, we've been seeing bounces and some gains, bargain hunting, there is this measure of Bloomberg's fear or greed indicator. We are below 0 for a 13th straight session, even with this rebound. This is the longest stretch of bearish sentiment that we've seen since the Delta variant.
We're reporting there, I notice again, we've slipped already to the 6,900 level in your terminal. Well, Dan, it's not just oil prices and inflation fears, but also softer remittances hurting the peso. Tell us more.
Absolutely, Jess. Just a quick peek on the oil prices here. Again, on the uptrend, we were hoping it would go back below 100. Nevertheless, it's up by 82 cents. That's US dollars cents per barrel. This is, of course, on the back of, there's going to be new talks between the Ukraine and Russia. That was actually resuming already yesterday. It still doesn't seem to, be completely paring back the prices. And as you mentioned, the peso might be affected not just by the oil, but also by the remittance sprint. Although today it seems to be strengthening a touch, even as we're still above 52 levels. We did see January OFW remittances up by 2.5% year on year. That's to the tune of $2.67 billion. However, this was lower than the 3.8% estimated by economists.
Here are the other headlines we're keeping our eyes on. Napocor is seeking regulatory approval to avail and use over 300 million pesos from a component of the universal charge collected from consumers for its environmental function to rehabilitate watersheds. In an application filed with the Energy Regulatory Commission, Napocor said its environmental projects for the year require the budget to address the supposed uncontrolled deforestation in watershed areas. Under the Electric Power Industry Reform Act of 2001, Napocor is entitled to the environmental charge collected from electricity users equivalent to 1/4 centavo per kilowatt hour of electricity sales.
Now, state-run Philippine National Oil Company, or PNOC, is eyeing an interim strategic petroleum reserve amid the still rising fuel prices. PNOC said it is the company's position to provide oil reserve stock through a co-storage, co-distribution program with oil players. They said the reserve stock will prevent further economic loss. PNOC President and CEO Jesus Posadas said the plan was to lease the storage capacities from industry players and help them distribute discounted fuel to the affected sectors.
And that's a first look into the business day this Wednesday, March 16, 2022. Catch us again tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are One News.